Well, welcome back to Coastal Processes Part 2. We'll start with deltas. And unfortunately, with how I've ordered the lectures, we're doing coastal processes after or before stream processes. In stream processes, we would have talked more about how rivers transport material. When their velocity drops off to nothing, it deposits material. And so we'll come back to that a little bit. But suffice to say, when a stream enters a large body of water, whether it's a lake or an ocean, it no longer can transport the material, so it has to dump it, and it deposits it right at the mouth of the stream. Now, if that material builds up and extends out into the body of water, that would be a delta. So you need to have shallow water, and if you don't, the sediments will just keep falling off into the deeper ocean, kind of what you're seeing over here. So places like off the coast of Madagascar, where you've got really shallow water, the Gulf of Mexico has shallow water near shore, you'll get deltas that can build up pretty extensively. You also have to have weak longshore currents, because if that current is really strong, it will carry away the sediments and they're not really going to be allowed to build up very well. The Nile, this portion of the Mediterranean, is very shallow. And if you were to follow the ancient coastline of North Africa, it actually would be down in here. But what's happened is all the sediments that have been deposited by the Nile over the millennium have built up into this fan-like shape. And what'll happen is it'll follow this path, and then it gets choked with sediments, then it'll change its path and follow another path and get choked with sediments, and then change its path over time, and it goes back and forth building out this. It's called the delta because it's kind of a triangle shape, and it builds up into the Mediterranean. Here, the Mississippi River Delta. This is shallow. This Mississippi River carries a lot of sediments. If you've ever seen it, it's not this pretty blue. It's this gray, brown color from all the sediments in it. Out here near like the Chandelier Islands, the water's really shallow. It's shockingly shallow. I have a friend who was a fisherman in this area, and so we were out here on his boat, and he had to get one of his shrimp baskets out of the water, and he just hops off the boat and he's in 4 feet of water. We're miles and miles away from the shoreline, but the water was only 4 feet deep. Now, obviously, you're kind of limited into what kind of boats can go into that area, but the water was really shallow, allowing the sediments to build up. So, given those conditions that you can't have a strong longshore current, you can't have even a strong coastal current, and you have to have shallow offshore environment, we don't get them. We just don't have the right conditions for it. So even that little bit of sediment down near, I forgot the name of it, beach next to Dana Point Harbor, that's not really a true delta, where the Santa Ana River, which carries a ton of sediments, it doesn't have a delta. In Huntington Beach, it's just nice and flat along that area. So we don't get them around here. We do get spits. And a spit is that longshore current carrying that littoral drift, carrying that sediment along the coastline. If it encounters a bay, well, the longshore current isn't going to curve around all of these impediments. What it does, it just kind of keeps it with its momentum going across the bay. So in doing so, it transports the sediments across the bay. So that's what you're seeing down here. The animated GIF is the sediments being pushed in the direction that the longshore current was carrying it. If it doesn't cross all the way, it's called a spit. If it goes all the way across, it's called a bay mouth bar, because at the mouth of the bay, there's a bar. What happens, why these will stay open, is as the tide rises, the water rushes in and flushes this out, and then as the tide drops, the water rushes out and flushes it. So these can stay open naturally, but over time, this will slowly fill with sediments. The tide differences become less so, and then this will close all the way across. And even this will eventually fill with sediments. And again, when we talk about streams, I'll explain why, but this will fill with sediments and this will just become a flat area. We have a spit in Orange County, Balboa Spit, although we don't call it that because that's terrible for marketing purposes. It's the Balboa Peninsula. So the Santa Ana River empties up here in Huntington Beach. The longshore current carries it down in this direction, carries the sediments across the opening of Newport Harbor, and in doing so creates the Balboa Peninsula. This harbor and this valley that's through here was created by the old pathway that thousands of years ago the Santa Ana River took. And at one point, it kind of shifted its path, which is normal for streams, and it is now exiting over here. And now the spit goes across it. Slowly but surely, this is filling with sediments. They have to dredge it quite often. The tidal flush does carry some out, but they have to constantly remove the sediments from Newport Harbor. You can see here how low the gradient is on it because, outside of human intervention, the only thing that would have transported the sediment would have been wave energy. So it's always going to be really close to sea level because waves aren't going to be transferring material much above sea level, can they? So this area is very prone to flooding with sea level change. This is going to be one of the most hardest, not going to be, it will be one of the hardest hit areas in all of Orange County just because it is so low lying. Now, Bataquitos had a baymouth bar going across it, but what they've done is they put in these jetties to encourage the tidal flow back and forth to kind of flush it out and to kind of block the sediments from blocking the entrance to the lagoon. And they do this because there's recreational activities back there. You can see how shallow this is. This is filling with sediments. I don't believe they're dredging Bataquitos, but they could be. This is on the way to San Diego. So that is Interstate 5 right there as you're heading towards San Diego. You'll cross a lot of these kind of bays on the way to San Diego. Some have water, some are filled with sediments. Some are, deeper than others. It all depends on how long ago they closed off with a baymouth bar or didn't close off with a baymouth bar. So I didn't have a good aerial photo of it other than that shallow one. So here you can see this is the bay. The baymouth bar almost closed across it, but it didn't quite do it. Now, we associate coral with coastal areas because if you look at the distribution, for the most part, we find it in coastal areas. Yes, there's a handful of coral species that grow at the bottom of the ocean, but they're very, very infrequent and rare. But since they grow in shallow water, we're most likely to find shallow water in coastal areas. And so that's why we put it in with this discussion. Now, coral is made out of calcium carbonate. Hey, wait a minute. We've seen calcium carbonate before. What is it? That's right, it's limestone. This is yet another way to make limestone. And coral is, yes, a living feature, but it's kind of a combination of things that why coral is calcium carbonate and then coral is also a living creature. So technically, these little tiny star-like shapes, these are polyps, they live in a calcium carbonate matrix. And that calcium carbonate matrix that they make of is what they're living on top of and to some extent a little bit inside of. And that as they grow and multiply, they're adding more and more calcium carbonate. So the polyp is what creates the calcium carbonate, which makes up the limestone, which is the coral. As the corals reproduce, they reproduce kind of on top of each other. And the older polyps, they die off and the coral gets larger and larger over time. The largest coral reef in the world is the Great Barrier Reef off the coast of Australia. And it's actually offshore. There's some areas that have some coastal coral, but for the most part, you got to take a boat out to get to it. And just a quick reminder that coral is very sharp. I was snorkeling with my brother in Hawaii, and of course, brothers goof around, and I was swimming underneath him trying to scare him, which I did, which was successful, but I ended up running into coral and it scraped the top layer of skin off my arm because it's a rock. It's very sharp. And it's also because these are living species, they tend to carry bacteria and other germs with them. So I get out of the water, I'm like, oh, great, I'm going to get an infection. And I tell my sister, and she's got, hold on. She had hydrogen peroxide in her purse. Who randomly carries hydrogen peroxide with you? Now, mind you, she's swimming with her adult brothers. I mean, it's not like we were kids. And she just happened to have it with her. Poured it on it, cleaned it off, never got an infection, but kind of learned my beware of coral lesson. That's me swimming in the coral. There's another coral reef off the coast of Mexico. And it's a little bit bigger down near Honduras and through there. Obviously, there's multiple species. There's soft coral, hard corals. Most of my discussion here is obviously the hard corals with the calcium carbonate matrix. Now, tsunamis are also a coastal process. Well, they're also in the mid-ocean as well. So what is a tsunami? A tsunami is a wave that moves across the ocean that was not generated by water. It was something that was generated by something that displaced water in the subsurface. So, an earthquake, a volcano, a landslide, all of those can displace water. The earthquake doesn't really itself necessarily cause the water to move, it just sends a vibration in it a little bit. But what the earthquake can do is, if it's at a plate boundary, there can be displacement and the plates can move. If there's a subsurface landslide, I guess it's called a marine slide, I don't know what you call it underneath the water, that displaces water, the earthquake caused a landslide, which caused the tsunami to occur. So that's why not every earthquake creates a tsunami, because it may or may not have displaced water in the process. Now, because the Pacific Ocean is surrounded by plate boundaries, it's not surprising that this is an area that gets a lot of tsunamis in it. And they can travel from one part of the world to another. Hilo is one of the centers of tsunami research. The Pacific Tsunami Museum is in Hilo. They were hit hard by a tsunami in the 40s. I'm going to get the name wrong. The National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration Tsunami Center is in Oahu, because they're using the military base for their logistics, but the museum is here. And this is what I do on vacation, is go to tsunami museums with my sister and niece. Now, the 46 tsunami that hit Hilo, there was an earthquake in Alaska, so they kind of knew, they could generally guess as to how long it would take to get there. And so the first wave that came through was minor, and everybody went, oh, we're fine. They went back to the shoreline. And then the second wave that came through was significantly larger and killed some people in Hilo. And also, this is a bus. This used to be a school, and there was a bus parked over here. And then the tsunami came through and swept away the bus, killing the driver, the teacher, and some kids on board. And it was after 46 is when they started tracking tsunamis in the open ocean to see how fast they're moving, how big they are, and it gives a chance for everybody to evacuate. The 57 tsunami was one of the first that was tracked pretty well through the ocean. This is on the north shore of Oahu. It wasn't that large. It was only about 6 feet. It did some damage to some of the coastal homes, but nothing catastrophic. The 57 tsunami is interesting for me because my parents were in Honolulu when this one happened, and they were on the other side of the island, and they'd gotten the tsunami warning. So what did they do? They went down to the yacht harbor to watch it, and instead of seeking high ground, and then when what wrapped its way around the island, it was only about 1.5 feet or 2 feet tall. So they kind of watched the water go up into the yacht harbor, then back down, and then they were really disappointed. And I thought to myself, well, if it had been dramatic, they'd have been dead. So it was probably pretty good that it was not very dramatic. And in Hawaii, in the phone books, if anybody has them anymore, most of this obviously is online now. They have maps of the area and walking times to get from place to place. So anytime I'm in Hawaii and we're staying in a hotel, I'll figure out what the shortest path to high ground is. And everybody makes fun of me, but I'm just saying, if there's a tsunami, I'm going to be one of the survivors. And then who's laughing then? So we'll use the 2004 tsunami kind of to describe what happened, because the 2004 tsunami in the Indian Ocean was easily the biggest natural disaster in the past 100 or so years. I mean, not since Krakatoa in the 1890s have we seen something that massive of a physical phenomenon that killed so many people. What happened? You're at a convergent plate boundary. This is when I wish I had some better animation, that I'm kind of limited with where I'm doing this online, is that the Indo-Australian plate was colliding with the Eurasian plate, and it was pulling down the Eurasian plate because it's a convergent boundary, one going underneath the other. When it was doing it, it pulled one boundary down and then it snapped back up. And when the boundary for the Eurasian plate snapped back up, it pushed water upward. Well, obviously water wants to be flat, so it went outward from there, and it swept across the Indian Ocean, killing people as far away as in Kenya. The devastation in through here was almost total. You had some islands completely overrun in the Indian Ocean by the water. The split was about 600 miles long, So that was one of the reasons it's such a massive tsunami. It wasn't just a single point displacement, it was a long linear displacement. In the open ocean, this is the same thing as a normal wave where you've got the circular vibration that dissipates with depth. Well, it's not hitting the ocean bottom for the most part, so really long wavelength, but a really long wave height. It's moving through the open ocean. It's not until it hits the ocean bottom where it starts to slow down. And when it slows down, when it hits the ocean bottom, the waves compress. This is the same process that we talked about for coastal waves, is that when you slow the bottom down, it increases the wave height. So when you compress the wave length, it increases the wave height and depth. Well, it doesn't typically do this just simply because it's too massive. It usually just creates something more like this, where you just got a big mound of water as opposed to some curling wave as it makes ashore. But since it increases the wave depth as well, as it approaches the shore, the wave depth is going to pull the water away from the shore. And this is often how people are killed, is they go down to see the exposed coral, the fish flopping around, the mud flaps, and then this thing hits them and they're dead. So here in Thailand, there's nothing here for scale. Is this 10 miles away? Is this 2 miles away? How tall is this? This is all mud flats because the water is pulled away, and this is racing at you at 80 to 100 miles an hour. So same location, the camera person has kind of changed their angle, pointing to the left instead of out to sea, and there's a little bit of coral reef that's exposed. You can see the boats here in the middle, and her name is Sandy. They never found her body. This is the last picture on their camera. This is about 75 to 80 feet tall and moving at 80 to 100 miles an hour. Water weighs 1 ton per cubic yard. Please feel free to do the math on that, the devastating things that can happen with it. These kind of photos are extremely rare simply because these don't happen very often. This happened in an area that didn't have any warning. So there wasn't people, taking advantage of camera opportunities like they could with the Japanese tsunami. And it caught a lot of people unaware of what the potential is. There's other videos out there. I've got some posted where you can look at the tsunami as it went through, much smaller in another town, and then the Japanese tsunami as well. But none like this. I've been searching and searching for these 80-foot walls of water videos, but I cannot find them. This is the best I did. They found this couple's camera. They never found John and Jackie, but they found their camera, and the family posted the pictures online. So this is why you've got some cities where that's a good almost a mile back to those trees, and the town that was here is gone. It's not just damaged, it's gone because the water has so much mass to it. And before and after of some of the islands, notice that it swept away not just the buildings, but it also scoured the sand and sediment as well. So Phuket was hit, some of the coastal hotels in through here. I had students who were in Phuket the day of the tsunami. It was their last day of the trip. They were going to get the flight that afternoon. They didn't want to get their surfboards out and get all messy before the flight, so they decided to just kind of store it and then go on a little nature walk. So they come back down to this devastation and had no idea what the heck happened. Completely escaped one of the worst disasters in memory, and they were there at the center of it and felt no ill effects. That just delayed their flight by one day. Fishing industry was devastated. Coral reefs were lifted up, which don't live well out of water. Boats damaged, nets damaged. There's a video that I'll have you guys watch later. I've posted it. Resorts completely destroyed, swept off. This is the same location. There's a story of on the Malay Peninsula of a girl who was down at the beach with her mom, and the water pulled away. She goes, "Mom, that's a sign that the tsunami's going to come." So they evacuated the beach for that hotel, for that resort. And at that resort, nobody died when the tsunami hit, all because that little girl was paying attention in her science class when they talked about tsunamis. So if you guys are somewhere in a tsunami, you see the water pull away from the beach, and you think, hey, that might be a tsunami, and you get to high ground and you live, I want a thank you card. Now, Japan had the same thing where you had the displacement, where you had the fault kind of pulled down and then sprung back up and it lifted up the water. But this was in a very small location where the displacement was. It wasn't a big linear one. It was just a single point. And so the area that was devastated was limited to a small portion of Japan when it happened. This one we have much better video footage of it happening. There's much better tsunami warning in place in Japan. It's a few years later, so technology is far more common. Everybody had a cell phone with a camera on it. So the tsunami sirens would go off, people would head to high ground, and then they whip out their cameras to videotape the tsunami coming in. It swept up a river plain. This is where we saw the most spatial damage. The loss of life was not that bad for something this devastating in a densely populated area, just simply because they had taken a lot of precautions for tsunamis before they occurred. And I've got another video for that posted too. You can see that on Canvas. Some of the debris that got swept out to sea has been kind of circulating in the Pacific Ocean. They've been actively sinking boats that they find just simply because they don't want them carrying barnacles or other foreign fish and biological entities to other harbors rather than trying to salvage them. So they've been tracking the path, which way it's going. It kind of missed Hawaii. There was a fear that it was going to strike Hawaii pretty hard, but it kind of nicked it. They've stopped tracking most of the sightings because they've been kind of dissipated. There's been a lot of debris that's kind of washed up on the Pacific Northwest. As far as I know, there's been no confirmed ones in Orange County, but I could be wrong. Now, can we get a tsunami here becomes the next question. The answer is maybe. There's a similar fault that could have a vertical displacement near Santa Barbara. The likelihood of it happening is pretty low. And if it does happen, it's going to happen so fast and in such a limited area. But I'm not going to say no, we can't, but it's not something I would worry about if I lived in Carpinteria. That's for sure, just because the likelihood is so small. So after that 2011 tsunami, on the heels of the 2004 tsunami, the Orange County Register and others had done tsunami research. If you've been to the coast, you've seen the tsunami warning signs. Again, we don't really have something that faces our coast that could generate a giant tsunami outside of these two islands here. So everything out to sea, if you go in this direction, there's really nothing that's close enough that if there was a massive earthquake in Indonesia, it's not going to generate a big tsunami that's going to make it all the way to Orange County. So I don't even worry about it here either. There's no big faults that are going to have vertical displacement in this area. The only thing that could cause it would be a freakish landslide on one of these two islands, San Clemente Island or Catalina Island. A freakish landslide that would send something in this direction, yes, it could create a tsunami. Have we seen any record of it ever happening? No, not for these islands. I'm not saying it can't, but you're stretching your imagination of things that could be tsunami danger. So don't worry about tsunamis. There's other things to worry about rather than tsunamis in coastal areas. Newport Beach is going to be overrun by sea level rise before they're ever hit by a tsunami. All right, check out the tsunami videos for both the the South, I'm going to sneeze. Sorry. For the Indian Ocean tsunami and the Japanese tsunami that are posted on Canvas. We'll see you guys later.